We wanted to figure out, well, what does this cost in terms of the electricity that got shut off for the Niwot market?
You came up with a fairly large price, right?
Yeah.
Over $12,000 per megawatt hour.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to energy podcast on all things Colorado energy, politics, and policy. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host, Amy Cooke, remote today from North Carolina. How you doing this week, Amy?
Listen, I finally had to turn on my air conditioner today, so thank goodness for fossil fuels that my air conditioner can be on.
You don't want sporadic intermittent air conditioning?
No, because there are clouds overhead right now. But it's it's hot and humid in North Carolina. So I'm thankful for my propane and my electricity, all of it.
Yeah, keeping the lights on is what it's all about, and it's actually what this episode's about. It's a perfect segue to introduce our guest, joining us again for his second time on the PowerGab podcast, our friend Isaac Orr. Isaac, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And the reason we wanted to have you on, Isaac, is because last week we did a special emergency episode about the public safety power shutoff that Xcel initiated because we got some pretty nasty windstorms here in Colorado. About 55,000 people had their power preemptively shut off to prevent wildfires. Another 100,000 or so, I think some reports have said even up to 150,000 or so, were out of power because of just sheer wind damage to the transmission lines. But you and your colleague, Mitch Rolling, at your Substack, Energy Bad Boys, which our listeners should definitely go subscribe to and go read, did a little interesting piece sort of quantifying the economic costs and distilling them for us. So if you want to take it away from me there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are always interested in what happens in Colorado because Xcel Energy is also the largest electricity provider in Minnesota, which is where I live. And, Amy and I have had many a struggle session about the machinations of Xcel Energy and the policy that drives them to do what they do. I mean, I think it's like a little naive to pretend that Xcel is a victim of circumstance in any of this because they also lobby on behalf of passing a lot of this green new garbage. So it's definitely policymakers with unrealistic worldviews pushing their ideas onto Xcel, but it's also like Xcel cashing in on it so they don't fight it very hard, right? So whenever we get a chance to take pot shots at the utility as a result, we do so. We saw this story about them shutting off, or hundreds of thousands of people losing power. Some of it's public shut off. And the Denver Post had a very interesting article on this, detailing what it cost business owners. And most of the businesses they talked to were in the Boulder area. I think they were all in Boulder County, and they were mostly food-based businesses, right? So these businesses lost power, sometimes with very little notice from Xcel Energy, which, tisk tisk, you should give people more warning, Xcel, if you're listening. And so these folks, these people were scrambling to save their product, right? So they either had like a freezer full of ice cream, which is what we're going to talk about here at the Niwot market. I think that's how you say the name of the town, right, Jake? Niwot? Niwot. Oh man, I've been saying it wrong all day. So in Niwot, I pronounced it like we would pronounce it in the Midwest, and that is not appropriate for Colorado. But there was like a wine store and pizzeria that they said they lost $70,000. Niwot lost $35,000 over the course of 24 hours, right? Because they did not have electricity. A lot of these businesses did what they could, scrambled to find refrigerated trucks that run on diesel fuel to save their product, right? And it's all because Xcel Energy decided that they were going to preemptively shut down their power lines, as your listeners probably heard all about last week. So I don't need to get back into that. But we wanted to figure out, well, what does this cost in terms of the electricity that got shut off for the NIWAT market. And how does that compare to like the levelized cost of energy for different power plants? And that's where we started. Do you have any specific questions you'd like me to talk about? I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation.
Actually, you came up with a fairly large price, right?
Yeah.
Over $12,000 per megawatt hour. So can you explain what that means? Megawatt hour versus a megawatt, or I actually, if you go down into the Substack, and by the way, everybody, we'll drop that in the show notes so that you have a link to it. But I think it's like $12 per kilowatt hour. So
Yeah.
if I were sitting at home, I am sitting at home. So I'm sitting at home. Explain how you go from $12 a kilowatt to $12,000 a megawatt hour, because I think people get confused.
Nobody knows what a kilowatt hour is, and nobody knows what a megawatt hour is, which makes it more difficult to convey the cost of electricity as opposed to gasoline, where everybody knows what a gallon is, right? So uh, there are like a kilowatt hour. Let's just think of it as like a thimble full of gasoline, right? I mean, these are not exact conversions, but let's just think of it this way. So, like, if you got a thimble full of gasoline and that's a kilowatt hour, and then you have a barrel full of gasoline, which is 42 gallons, like that's kind of what a megawatt hour is. There are 1,000 kilowatt hours in every megawatt hour. So, that's one way to think of it. I always just think of it as like Legos anyway. I think it's more helpful to think of kilowatt hours or megawatt hours as units of electricity. I think it's kind of just confusing to introduce like, oh, well, it's 1 megawatt over 1 hour. Like it's like nerd stuff. So to the nerds who are listening who get it, thank you. We appreciate your service. For all the normies, I'm just trying to break this down in the most simple way possible. So when we look at the cost per kilowatt hour in Colorado for normal commercial business operations, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and I don't have this in the piece. We were stressed for time when we were putting this one together. So I definitely feel like I left some yards on the field here. But
I think it's around 10 cents a kilowatt hour, around there.
Yeah. So for like Colorado, it says 2023 was 11.67 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity, right? So we're talking cents. And when we're talking about the fact that the amount of power that this grocery store would have used, like losing that and having all of this, not being able to make your sales, not being able to save the frozen deli meat and the ice cream, like all of those costs. Maybe it helps to talk about this. So an average grocery store uses about 53 kilowatt hours or tiny Legos of electricity per square foot per year, right? So what I did is I measured the square footage of Niwot Market using like Google. You can use Google Maps and you can measure the square feet of places. So I was able to figure out that this market on average uses 119 kilowatt hours of electricity every hour, right? So then you're able to kind of figure out like, okay, well, how much electricity would this place have used? How many Legos of electricity would have been consumed over the course of 24 hours, which is how long they were without power? And what does that cost? If you divide 35,000 by the number of electricity Legos lost, what does that mean? So we got $12 per kilowatt hour of electricity that they did not consume, which means it's 111 times more costly to go without electricity than it is to consume it for this grocery store. So they had these massive losses. And we can talk about, and then like if you multiply $12 per kilowatt hour by 1,000 to get it up to a megawatt hour, then you're talking $12,000 per unit or large Lego or barrel of oil of electricity that you're not consuming. I'm throwing out way too many analogies, but I'm hoping one of them sticks.
What I hope will
Yeah.
the point being is that it isn't just an inconvenience to
Right.
not have power. It is, and it's one of these things. To those of us who are in Colorado, we knew this. We heard about this windstorm coming. We knew about it. At least, I think what was surprising to Coloradans or to XL customers was the preemptive shutdown of power. Now, honestly, I don't blame XL for doing it, but to your point, that you need to give people notice. It's not like they didn't know. They actually employ meteorologists that are there all the time. They knew it was coming. They could have given people more notice than 4 hours ahead of time, because to your point, then you have to scramble and get your fossil fuel fired backup. And it's more than just an inconvenience. It is expensive. It's expensive for business. And to your point, it was, over $12,000, and that's the headline of this piece that the Energy Bad Boys did on their Substack. Over $12,000 per megawatt hour. That's more than an inconvenience for a small business. That is their livelihood.
Oh, that's crippling.
Yeah,
if you're a small business, and especially in the food industry, the margins are so thin there. If you just lose $35,000 and you have no recourse to get that back from Excel, I mean, good luck. I mean, that is especially for like a restaurant. I'm sure restaurants in Colorado are already feeling the pressure of I don't know if you guys have new minimum wage laws that are going in, but we have all of that nonsense going on here in Minnesota. So why not add more straws to the camel's back with unreliable power?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And just to put a finer point on that, I actually saw a new tidbit of information in the Denver Post today where a local business group, because this $12,000 figure, this is just one business's experience. That's the massive expense for one particular business. And the Denver Post has a new survey data point from, I guess, 96 or so Boulder-specific businesses responded to a survey about economic losses from this public safety power shutoff. And they estimated about $1.3 million in lost revenue, $250,000 in unpaid wages, another $125,000 in product losses, so throwing out food. And that's just 96 businesses in just Boulder. We know that this public safety power shutoff affected 5 or 6 counties, plus however many folks lost power because of the wind. So talk to us a little bit. A great point you made in the piece was why this is necessary to assign a monetary value to the loss of load, because in the ever-present tong wars over the levelized cost of different electricity sources, people always have their preferred metrics and what you did and don't include. And they talk about, the externalities of pollution, you need to take that into account. Talk to us a little bit about sort of the rationale of including this as an externality in your considerations for power portfolios.
Yeah, I mean, people like to do cost-benefit analyses that only look at costs if you're talking about fossil fuels, right? So they say, oh, well, you haven't measured the CO2 impact of burning this fossil fuel. And we said, okay, we always address that later in our reports. We don't put it in our levelized cost of energy graph. So we always look at that compared to whatever social cost of carbon the state is using. So, but how about I'll add the social cost of carbon to my graph when you add the social cost of blackouts to the intermittent wind and solar that you are looking to make us depend on for a large portion of the power. And in Colorado, I know Governor Polis ran on the promise of 100% carbon free with renewables, right? It was a 100% renewable energy mandate by 2040. So when we ran the numbers for you guys in the great series of reports that Jake put together using our analysis, huge blackouts stem from that kind of an unreliable power service, which is why we always say nuclear is going to be way cheaper, even though it looks, people claim that it's more expensive, but it provides a higher value to the grid. So ultimately you're paying less. But So yeah, I mean, we wanted to put this out there in order to counter this, prevailing narrative that, oh, well, you need to incorporate the emissions cost. I'm like, well, there is an unbounded liability of not providing people with power 24/7. And, in Colorado, nobody died as far as I am aware of. But what's the value of a life? I think the EPA uses $9 million or something like that. So there is like an actuarial cost that is assigned to the loss of life. But if this power shutoff had happened in January when it's super cold in Colorado, and all of a sudden people can't use their heaters because either their blower fans for their natural gas or their radiators aren't circulating the water that they need, then we're talking death. So what's your social cost of that? So if you want to have beef with me about my graph, you better bring receipts.
Well said. Well, the other thing is we know what happens when power is out for several days. We saw it with Uri down in Texas. 246 people died. When you don't have reliable power, people die.
Yep.
So beyond $12,000, dollars a megawatt hour, which is a lot, the death is a lot more. And in our paper, when you guys ran the analysis, the model shows that we could experience a period, a 24-hour period of no power just based on weather patterns and even overbuilding on wind and solar and batteries and everything. Still, these weather events are going to happen, and the overbuilding doesn't prevent it. We're still going to have these outages. It's beyond money. It's beyond inconvenience. Literally, people lose their lives.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in to piggyback off that, because someone might say, well, look, guys, this blackout happened now, and we still have majority fossil fuels on the grid, so you're talking about renewables. But I think an important point in this is this was a transmission-related concern, and guess which resource or set of resources requires the most extensive build-out of new transmission lines that are going to be, or at least we're told, ever more vulnerable to extreme weather, wildfire risks. So either on the generation side or the transmission side, the policy road we're heading down only leads us to more vulnerability on this front, and I'm not sure people are really grappling with that.
Yeah, and it would also be really interesting to know, and I don't have this information, but how much money has Xcel Energy spent building wind turbines and solar panels and shutting down their coal plants to build new crap that doesn't work as well, compared to how much money have they spent making sure that the existing transmission system that they have is being properly maintained so they don't have to shut people's power off when it gets windy out. So I think that's also, there's a huge opportunity cost here when we say, oh, well, we're going to mandate, the use of specific energy sources that aren't particularly good at their job. And okay, so how much of that spending, what's been the impact on rates, and where could that money have gone otherwise if it wasn't being funneled into unreliable sources? So, could this have been avoided? I don't know, but spending more money on transmission and making sure that you've solidified that probably wouldn't have hurt.
Yeah, the other thing on that, and that is particularly what they found in Hawaii.
Yep.
Is that there had been negligence, and there are multiple people or I would say entities to blame here, but there had been negligence on the part of maintaining their grid and the infrastructure and the transmission line. And so the utility wasn't investing as they should, but there's also a Public Utilities Commission that needs to ensure, that's their job.
Yep.
But they were instead chasing subsidies for wind and solar or for renewables and investing money there as opposed to into transmission lines and maintaining transmission lines. To your point, could this have been prevented? We don't know. But the other thing we don't know is what would have looked like if we had been investing more into grid stability versus wind and solar. A lot of questions there left unanswered, and I doubt we'll get them in the state of Colorado. At least we won't get anything other than this is not a renewable problem. This is an Excel problem, or there won't be anyone looking probably at policy that says we should stabilize the grid. But that's why we're here.
And were these even like historically high winds, or was this something that happens periodically? And, you know, these are the kinds of questions that would be fascinating. Let's invite Xcel Energy to give their part of the conversation, and just don't tell them that I'll be on the show. And
Actually,
then we'll surprise them.
I want to hear their testimony in front of the Public Utilities Commission. I mean, so truly, the Marshall Fire in Colorado was absolutely horrific and catastrophic, but it was a different weather pattern. And I can't tell you how many times I heard the meteorologists say, yes, these are high winds, but this is not the same as the Marshall Fire. This is, don't worry, don't have, this is not the Marshall Fire all over again. Coming from a different direction. But to your point, have we seen high winds like that in Colorado? Yeah, it's Colorado. Have you been to the Eastern Plains? It's you know, we are just south of Wyoming, and they're also known for wind. So are these historic and unprecedented? No, they're not. We have these events. So
yeah, especially because I think the wind actually underdelivered, I think, on a lot of what the fear was. There was sustained 100-mile-an-hour plus winds is what they were afraid of, and I don't think any of the places affected by this public safety shutoff got close to that or anywhere, certainly not on a sustained basis. So it ended up being an over-conservative move on the Xcel's part. Obviously, hindsight is one thing, but I think crystallizes for the first time in Coloradans' minds that this is a live proposition to lose power for an extended period like this in a state where we haven't seen a winter storm Uri, we haven't seen a winter storm Elliott yet. And I think that's the big takeaway that's got everyone freaked out. But as we're sort of coming up on time here, Isaac, I wanted to give you a chance to have the last word on this, and then we'll kick it over to Amy for her major takeaways. But Isaac, any takeaways for our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I mean, electricity just has to always be on, right? You can't have a situation where you are preemptively shutting it off because you didn't maintain your transmission lines. I'm not saying they're negligent, but I mean, Xcel also was responsible for a huge fire down in Texas. So like, this is a growing theme throughout the Western United States. It's not just Xcel, but let's focus on the nuts and bolts of the job and stop messing around with stuff that doesn't work very well.
It's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so we have to have reliable power. It's not an option. And so this is why I say this to every single time. Get a generator. We are going to see the road that Colorado is on, the policy it is following, and it's not a resource problem. It is a policy problem in Colorado. And because of that, you have to take care of you and your family and your business. Get a generator.
Yeah, that's a critical point, and it's as good a point as any to wrap up on. So that's been another episode of PowerGab. Thanks again for tuning in, listeners and viewers. If you like what we do here, head on over to IITV to get the video version, or if you prefer the audio version, it's going to be available on all your podcasting apps, Apple to Spotify. And if you want to pitch in and contribute to what we're doing at the show, pitch ideas, give us feedback. We're always happy to hear feedback from our viewers. Go to info@powergab.org. But until next time, we'll see you.